Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC 307, which goes down this weekend in Salt Lake City, Utah. So with Salt Lake City, of course, we're going to be experiencing some elevation levels. Not as high as Denver, not as high as Mexico City, so I don't expect it to be like a huge factor. However, you do have to take it into consideration that the elevation levels are slightly higher than your usual, like Vegas, for example. So, yeah, there will be some elevation there, but like I said, not as high as the other couple of popular places that the UFC go to, like I say, with Denver and Mexico City. Of course, we've got two title fights as well. We've got the men's light heavyweight championship on the line. We've got the women's bantamweight championship on the line as well. Aside from the selling point of the two championship fights, I don't think it's the greatest pay-per-view from a name perspective, but as I always say, and I don't know whether this is just, the fan in me, I'm a hardcore supporter, but I'm a fan first and foremost as well. I do still think there's some really fun matchups on the card, and again, I know you hear this a lot from me, but I'm a fan, and, I recognise when there's a good matchup put together, but just from like a name recognition perspective, like household names, I don't think there's too many on the card, but I'm still looking forward to it and I'll still be watching. Now, just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, if you do want to jump into the action this weekend at UFC 307, then you can do so directly at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're somebody that just wants to follow the official bets from the Handicapper, which is myself, then you can do so on the official bet section. But if you're a long-term gambler and you like to make your own final decisions, then again, we've got a really good recommended bet section where if you're just wanting to see where we're at with some of our recommended bets, see if it's something that you agree with or disagree with, we do have a recommended bet section where we post what we believe are the best bets from a long-term perspective for every fight card, and they come with written breakdowns as well. Or even if you're just a fun gambler and you just like to hit those long shot parlays, you can create your own parlay with our fun gamblers section. Or if you don't want to create your own parlay but you still want to play for fun, then we've got pre-made parlays for you in that same section as well. And of course, every single subscription on the MMA Play 365 website from a betting perspective comes with Bayes AI, our UFC prediction software, which gives a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every fight of every UFC event. And that's all at MMAplay365.com. And that's it. With the introduction out the way, with the promo out the way, we get into the breakdowns. And of course, we start, as always, with the main event. We've got the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship on the line. Alex Pereira, the current champion, versus Khalil Rountree Jr. That's right, Khalil Rountree Jr. I think this took a lot of people, or potentially every fan, by surprise when this fight was announced. I don't think anybody thought that Rountree was in any sort of conversation for a title shot. Most people expected it to be Ankalaev, but there was other options there as well. And look, I am actually not hating on this fight, by the way. I'm just saying it was a little bit of a surprise because, like I've already said, I don't think anybody expected Rountree to be in and around a title shot yet. But, he's an exciting fighter. He brings power. He's going to stand and strike with Pereira, who is, as we all know, one of the most, maybe the most elite striker in the entire UFC, in the entire world of mixed martial arts. He's at that level where, it's tough to really name a fighter that's a better technical striker with that sort of power as Alex Pereira. So, yeah, he's probably the most dangerous striker in mixed martial arts. And someone like Khalil Rountree Jr. is not going to shy away from that. He's going to come forward. I think Rountree is going to be landing on Alex Pereira as well. I don't think it's going to be Rountree shooting desperately for takedowns because he doesn't want to challenge himself with the striking. Rountree's got an opportunity here to really, really make a statement and take the MMA world by storm, because if Rountree beats Alex Pereira, I think it's going to be a massive shock that, is heard all around the world. And look, with that being said, I do think it will be a shock if Rountree wins this fight. And, I'm not going to sit here on a podcast and start saying I think Rountree is going to beat Alex Pereira. Do I think there's a possibility of it? Well, yes, I do. It's a light heavyweight division. Both fighters hit super hard. Both will be exchanging in striking exchanges. Khalil Rountree is absolutely violent, like aggressively violent. So if you're genuinely asking me, would I be shocked if I see one punch in a fist fight from Rountree land on Alex Pereira and knock him out? No, I'm not going to be surprised. Do I think it's a likely outcome? At the same time, no, I don't. So it's one of these really violent fights that is quite volatile in my opinion. But the reality is, even though Khalil Rountree Jr. is on a 5-fight win streak, he's got 4 knockouts within those 5 fights. The 2 fights prior to that win streak, he was on or coming off back-to-back losses against Iwan Kutalaba and Marcin Prachnio. So, yeah, it's one of them that, look, I really love that the UFC have stepped outside the box with this fight. I do think Ankalaev should have been the fighter fighting for the title, and of course he's not, but he's got to take the winner. Unless, obviously, Rountree does knock out Alex Pereira, they'll end up running this fight back again, and then Pereira will likely win the rematch, and then they'll probably go to a third. But I think the next fighter to fight for a title shot, regardless of what happens within this era of Pereira and Rountree, it has to be Ankalaev. And it actually makes me laugh as well when people say Ankalaev's boring. He's had like 13 fights in the UFC, only 5 of them have gone to a decision, there's 8 finishes, so it's not as if he's literally just like fighting to point fighting or taking his opponents down and just laying on him, doing nothing for the full fight, every single fight. He's scoring knockouts himself. He's also being finished, in that last second against Paul Craig. So I definitely think Ankalaev should be the next guy, but of course we're not there yet. And like I say, I think that, I can't go against Alex Pereira. The dude's huge. He's massive. He's powerful. He's, from a technical perspective, one of the most elite strikers. He's got power in both hands. His low kicks are some of the nastiest low kicks. I think when Khalil Rountree's coming into range, I think Pereira is going to be beating up the lead leg of Khalil Rountree, regardless of what stance Rountree's in. I think Pereira will be landing on Khalil as he's coming in, and I just feel that although Khalil is this aggressive, violent fighter, he's a fighter that has just not experienced an elite level striker like Alex Pereira yet. So I think absolutely in Khalil Rountree's head, he's thinking, well, I can catch this guy, but I think that's easier said than done, and I think he's going to realise very quickly inside the cage that he's probably not going to find Pereira maybe as quickly or as easy as he thought he was pre-fight, and that might then start having to set in some in-cage adjustments. Rountree might have to make some alterations to how he's approaching the fight, get the reads of Pereira before actually coming into range. But Pereira's not like super high volume, so even trying to wait and get the reads could potentially take a while, all whilst Pereira is going to be coming into the cage with the exact same game plan, with the exact same strategy as he always does. And I think while Rountree is trying to figure things out, Pereira's going to be landing. I think he's going to be breaking him down piece by piece, and I think eventually Pereira does find a knockout, if I'm being honest. But like I say, at this weight, with 2 violent strikers, you can't be shocked if there's a knockout from the underdog. But I do think that it's unlikely. Possible, but unlikely. I think Pereira knocks him out, and I'm picking Alex Pereira to win this fight and still the UFC light heavyweight champion. And in the next fight, another championship fight. This time we're with the women's bantamweight championship. We've got Raquel Pennington, the current champion, versus the returning Juliana Pena. And this is a really cool fight, if I'm being honest, because in a world where mixed martial arts has evolved, the UFC's had, a changing of the guard, multiple times in multiple divisions. We've got 2 OGs of the game in the women's bantamweight championship still at the top of the sport and fighting for a title. I also kind of think this must be the oldest. And again, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but it's got to be up there with the oldest championship fight we've ever had. We've got Raquel Pennington, who's 35, Pena's 36, or it might be the other way around. I think Pennington's 36, Pena's 35. So in regards to age, there's absolutely nothing between them, but they're both up there in age, considering, like I say, we've seen other divisions in the UFC change the guard. We've got completely different top 15s from 1 to 15 in different divisions to what we had sort of maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, when these two were absolutely in the prime. But it's a cool fight. It's an OG fight, and I actually think it's going to be a pretty close fight because, look, I think Pennington's going to be the better striker here. Pena, I don't think has ever had, amazing technical striking for this level in the UFC, but she does have efficient striking. Like, she can punch her way into range where she'll use her wrestling, get her opponents down to the mat, and then she's got a really good grappling game. Top side, she's safe, she's calm, she doesn't make too many mistakes, and she's quite heavy on top as well. Now, with Pennington has always been able to be taken down. Like, a wrestling defense is okay, like, it's not terrible, but you can get her down, and opponents that have got a lesser wrestling game than Juliana Pena have taken her down. But what's always saved Pennington, like, if you look in these fights where Pennington has been taken down once, twice, maybe 3 times, she's still winning these fights, so she's not losing fights because she's been getting taken down, and that's because her get-up game has normally been okay. But at the same time, I don't think she's ever fought somebody with that top-heavy wrestling style of Juliana Pena that's going to be able to keep her down for long periods of time. So it's going to be really interesting to see Pena on top of Pennington, because if Raquel Pennington does struggle to get back up, I think it's going to be a long 5 rounds for her. Or Pena might even get a submission. Like, I think just because Pena's been out for a couple of years, I think people just forget, like, how skilled she actually is. And bear in mind, the last 2 fights she fought was against Amanda Nunes, who was, the GOAT of women's MMA. She was double champion, and Pena even won one of those fights, and I know it was very, like, low percentage, and it was pretty strange watching it, if I'm being honest. And then they rematched, and Nunes absolutely smoked her. But the fact is that in the last 2 fights, Pena has fought a fighter that is absolutely miles ahead of Raquel Pennington. So, weirdly enough, and I know it's strange saying this, especially at this level, against the champion, but Pena's actually taken a step down in competition compared to her last 2 fights. So, I think it's going to be an easier fight for Pena than her last 2 fights, and again, I don't think that's controversial. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think it all depends on the get-up game of Pennington, because if this is a 25-minute kickboxing fight, Pennington wins. If Pena is taking Pennington down 2, 3, 4, 5 times in the fight, but Pennington gets straight back up, and then it's going to be the striking that scored, and then again, it's going to be Pennington that wins. But I just think there's going to be more to this fight than Pena either failing on takedowns or taking Pennington down and Pennington standing right back up. And the fact it's 5 rounds as well, I think benefits Pena because of that style. If this was 3 rounds, I think Pennington will be able to get up for 2 rounds at the very least and win a 29-28. But the 5 rounds makes it a little bit more different because Pena has more rounds to work with and to get at Pennington and to spend a little bit more time on top and, make it a bit of a longer night with that type of style. So although I think it's a super close fight, I think that legitimately both women have got paths to victory, like legitimate paths to victory. I am actually going to side with Pena here. I do think that Pena, like I say, the top side grappling is something that I think that Raquel Pennington may not have dealt with quite the same with that style that Pena's got on top. I think the heavy top side pressure along with the submission game as well. I think Pena's just a little bit trickier on top side grappling than Pennington's previous opponents. So again, I'm not saying Pennington can't deal with it, but I just think that Pena's going to be a little bit better than what Pennington's dealt with before with this same type of style is what I'm trying to say. So close fight. I think it could even be one of those fights where it goes a full 5 rounds and we've got absolutely no idea who's won, which way the judges have scored it. Maybe it's a split decision. But for the sake of the prediction, I'm picking Juliana Pena to win this fight and new UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion. And in the next fight, a UFC legend through and through, we've got Jose Aldo versus Mario Bautista. And this is another one of these fights where I don't know I can't say that the UFC are trying to trip Jose Aldo up, because I just don't think Jose Aldo is a fighter that's going to be able to perform in the top sort of like maybe 3 to 5 of the division. Although having said that, I think he would be competitive. I just don't think he's got the skill set with, the age and the decline a little bit to be able to comfortably beat those guys in sort of the top 3 and top 5 is probably what I'm trying to say. So I don't think it's the UFC trying to trip Aldo up. I think he's fighting the right types of opponents for where he's at in his career. again, is probably the right way to word what I've just tried to say. But Mario Bautista, look, he's a tough fighter. He's a fighter that's good everywhere. He's very aggressive. He has power for the division as well. His striking's good. He mixes things up, varies between his punches and kicks. He's got decent wrestling. He's got an underrated grappling game, in my opinion, as well. So Mario Bautista is absolutely a fighter that's going to be there, that's going to be game, that's going to be competitive. But I don't know. I thought Jonathan Martinez was going to beat Jose Aldo. Like, you rewind back to Aldo and Jonathan Martinez. Like, Martinez was on an absolute heater. He was banging the legs out of every opponent that he was fighting. He was getting knockouts. He was getting finishes. He was looking better and better each time he fought. Every time we saw him, it was, such a devastating performance. And you're thinking, well, Jonathan Martinez is the goods, and he's got a style, again, with the leg kicking game, similar to Aldo when Aldo kicks, and maybe Jonathan Martinez might be that fighter, that young, youthful fighter that's got so much better, that's finishing fighters in the UFC to be able to beat Jose Aldo, or at least be like super competitive with him, where Aldo knows he's been in a fight after the fight, if that makes sense. But man, like, the experience and veteran levels that Jose Aldo has still got, and Martinez wasn't really too competitive with Jose Aldo. Aldo won that fight very comfortably. And I think Mario Bautista is a similar type of fighter to Jonathan Martinez in regards to where he's at, the run that he's on, the surge in the division. And again, like, you look at Bautista and he's having close fights with Damon Blackshear, and with that Damon Blackshear, he drops a round as well. And then there's also a load of media that scored that fight to Damon Blackshear as well. So look, what I'm not doing is being disrespectful to Damon Blackshear. What I'm actually doing is just making fighter comparisons, because look, if Bautista was like absolutely smashing his opponents leading up to a Jose Aldo 30-27, or finishing every opponent and just looking completely dominant, then yeah, like, maybe we can think Mario Bautista would be able to do to Aldo what at least I thought that Martinez would be able to do to Aldo. But I still think that Bautista is capable of losing rounds, and I think he's capable of losing rounds against fighters that aren't the level of Jose Aldo. So again, this is before we even talk about, does Mario Bautista come into the cage and get starstruck by Aldo, because we've seen that before. We've seen it with not just Aldo, but other UFC legends, where the younger upcoming fighters should be getting the win, or at least we think should be like highly competitive, but then they're standing there taking pictures just because they're so starstruck with a fighter that they've probably been like a huge fan of their entire life. But again, back to the stylistic matchup, I think that Jose Aldo has got this ability to be able to really calm these, young explosive fighters down inside the cage, slow them down a little bit, get the fight at a pace that Aldo's more comfortable with. He's done it so many times, and I think even in the last 3 years, Aldo has beaten fighters that are better than Mario Bautista. And again, I don't want to discredit Bautista because he's in this spot for a reason. I just feel that at some point Jose Aldo is going to fall off that cliff. And it could be any fight, like it could be this fight, it could be the next fight or the fight after that. And we just don't know when that's going to be until we see it. But, you look at you can only look at what you've seen recently in the past. And I think Jose Aldo is still a fighter that's got so much to give in the UFC. I think he's still a fighter that, even if he's not as sharp and as explosive and as exciting as what he used to be, he's got so much quality that he's just so difficult to beat. And look, I think if Bautista does try to wrestle, which I think he does, Jose Aldo has got like insane takedown defense. I think it's at like 95% or some high 90% takedown defense. And that's not a small sample size. And that's also a sample size that's got elite level fighters in the UFC. It's got elite level wrestlers on that as well. So I'm just not convinced Bautista is going to be able to take Jose Aldo down at will. And I don't even know if he'll be able to take him down at all. And if he does get him down, well, Aldo's a legit BJJ black belt. He's going to pop right back up to his feet. And then if Bautista can't wrestle or grapple Aldo, he's left striking with him. And I just think Aldo's still a better technical striker that, again, will slow the fight down and get the fight fought at his own pace. with Jose Aldo, you look at the fighters that he's beaten, that has beaten him in the UFC. The only fighters that beat Jose Aldo are the elite of the elite. And like I said, at some point that will change. It could be this fight, it might be the next fight or the fight after. But until I see it, I can't really call it. And I just don't think Bautista is at the level of a fighter that Jose Aldo will lose against or has lost against in the past. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jose Aldo to win this fight. And in the next fight back in the women's bantamweight division, we've got Kayla Harrison versus Ketlen Vieira. And look, I just want to say in regards to Kayla Harrison, like, so much respect to Kayla because, you know, in PFL, she was fighting at lightweight. She was a big lightweight as well, you know, muscular, you know, just a really big lightweight fighter. And obviously when she's coming to the UFC, there's no women's lightweight division. There's no women's featherweight division anymore. So the highest weight class was 135 pounds at bantamweight. And look, pretty much everybody questioned it outside of, obviously, Harrison's team. I believe they did like a test cut before that Holly Holm fight. And Harrison's team knew that she would be able to get to 135. Obviously, the public didn't. But I was so impressed that, you know, the dedication just to get down to 135. And the thing is, Harrison looked absolutely phenomenal as well, both from a physique perspective, but also like from a fight perspective as well. Because it's not as if she went in there with, you know, one of the lower level fighters to sort of test the new weight, maybe on a little bit of a weaker card. She went in there on a pay-per-view against Holly Holm and performed in the way she did, like absolutely dominant, got the second round finish. And now, like I say, she's one of the top fighters in the division, and I do think she will be a future UFC champion as well based on that Holly Holm performance. I just don't believe that Holly Holm performance was a one-off type of fight for Kayla Harrison. I think she's going to be that good and that dominant in this division. Now, what makes this fight really interesting against Ketlen Vieira is a very solid BJJ player herself. That's where she's predominantly best. But I just don't think that Vieira is going to pose too many issues with Kayla Harrison on top of her. I think Harrison's going to be very heavy on top. I think Harrison is going to be able to, you know, sort of avoid anything being thrown up from bottom, like arm bars, triangles, maybe a guillotine. I think that Harrison can take this fight on the mat and put Vieira on her back comfortably without too many issues. Yes, Vieira might be able to get up once or twice, but I just think the wrestling of Harrison is going to be dominant here. I think she is going to be able to take Vieira down at will. And again, it's going to be one of those situations. I don't think we see it as much as what we used to, but I think it's going to be one of those scenarios where the topside wrestling and the heavy pressure topside is going to nullify the grappling of the BJJ specialist. Whilst both fighters are on their feet, I think potentially quite even. I don't think Kayla Harrison's like a million miles ahead of Ketlen Vieira striking. I think Vieira can strike really well herself, but I think that Harrison will hit a little bit harder, and I think she'll be more physical. So what I'm anticipating from the striking is it might be punch for punch, punch for punch, but I think Harrison's going to be punching to close the distance. And once they close up, I think it's going to be a natural reaction for both fighters just to get a hold of each other. That's where we're going to see the physical advantages of Harrison. That's where we're going to see the takedowns. And I think Harrison's going to be a bit of a nightmare, not just for Vieira, but just in this UFC division in general. So yeah, potentially a future champion in the UFC, in my opinion, for Kayla Harrison. As for this fight, I'm picking Kayla Harrison to win this fight. And in the next fight, this has got to be like such a fun fight, probably one of the most fun fights on the card. And it's a fight that I'll be honest, I've been going backwards and forwards on in regards to picking a winner because it's just very, very difficult. We've got Roman Dolidze versus Kevin Holland. Now, the thing is with Kevin Holland, he's going to have a big speed advantage in this fight, big movement advantage, volume advantage as well. So yeah, look, I think Holland's going to be moving quicker, moving more dynamically, and racking up more volume in regards to the strikes. I just don't know whether middleweight's Kevin Holland's best weight class. Like, I don't understand why because he came down to welterweight and he was performing really well. I don't know why he went back up to middleweight. You know, only he can answer that. Maybe he just doesn't want the weight cuts. And, you know, you can't really fault that. It takes a toll on the human body cutting that much weight if you're fighting, you know, as often as what Kevin Holland fights at. So maybe he is just trying to, you know, just not destroy his body maybe. And it's not as if he's like undersized at middleweight. I just think that he's very big at welterweight and has got a lot of physical advantages. His power carries down at welterweight, his speed does as well. So, yeah, I'm not too sure. But look, Roman Dolidze is a big middleweight. So I think that, look, where Kevin Holland's going to be a little bit quicker, a little bit more dynamic with his movement, and he's going to land more volume, I think Dolidze is going to be landing the bigger action strikes. So we've seen this type of fight so many times before from a striking perspective. You know, we've got one fighter landing volume, looking pretty slick, but then we've got the other fighter that's not landing as much volume, but when he does land, the crowd's going wild. You know, the judges are hearing the strikes land on the face as well. And then it becomes, look, if it goes to a decision, it becomes one of those fights. Do the judges score, you know, the volume, or did they score their big action strikes, the strikes that one fighter is trying to knock his opponent out with constantly? And more often than not, they go with the bigger action strikes. Although you can't really predict what the judges are going to be like on the night. You know, we can only go on sort of, you know, an average of what we've seen previously. I do feel like the bigger action strikes are the strikes that the judges love to see a little bit more. The strikes that gets the fans in the arena going as well. So from a striking perspective, I think it's going to be razor close because, again, not every judge is going to score impact. A lot of judges will score volume. And look, if Holland is double or tripling Dolidze up, then the power and the power of the strikes that Dolidze is landing is going to be irrelevant anyway, because at that point you have to go for volume. Now, in regards to the wrestling and grappling, it's interesting. It's really, really interesting because both fighters are legit grapplers, but I don't think either fighter go for as many takedowns, shoot as many takedowns, or pursue the wrestling as much as they should. Especially Dolidze, Dolidze has got legit grappling. Like, he's a very, very tricky grappler. Like, look at what he did to Jack Manson. He's a tough grappler to deal with, and he's very strong as well. So I think that it's in Dolidze's best interest to maybe mix in a little bit of wrestling against Kevin Holland. But Kevin Holland, although he has been taken down easily in the past, he normally gets taken down by like the D1 wrestlers or the Dagestani Russians. It's that type of wrestling that seems to get at Holland easily. So I think Dolidze could get Holland down. It'll just be a little bit more difficult because he's not a Dagestani Russian. He's not a former NCAA D1 wrestler. So I think that it's going to be tougher for Dolidze to get Holland down, although it's possible. And yeah, look, it's, like I say, I've been going backwards and forwards. I think it's a super close fight. I think the betting lines are close for a reason as well. But I think I'm actually going to side with Dolidze here. And the reason why is I do think he could win a striking fight with the bigger action strikes as long as he doesn't get like doubled or tripled up on the volume. And I do think that there is a secondary path to victory for Dolidze with the wrestling and the grappling, whereas I don't think Holland's going to, you know, start engaging in the wrestling against Dolidze. And I think once Holland feels the power of Dolidze and how strong he is, I think Holland will try to be on his bike a little bit and just stick and move. So I kind of think Dolidze could potentially win a super close, sweaty, you know, decision based on the power shots. But I do think Dolidze is the fighter more likely to mix things up as well. And with my opinion on maybe Holland being more suited to welterweight, I think he'll be physically matched from a strength perspective as well. Physically outmatched against Dolidze. So yeah, there's a couple of things on Dolidze's side that just lean me towards him a little bit more. So for those reasons, I'm picking Roman Dolidze to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Joaquin Buckley. Now, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, we've said it for years. Look, he's past 40 now, so he's going to be a fighter that should be declining. But man, like, again, he's holding off on that decline a little bit like Jose Aldo as well. Like, you're just expecting it fight after fight after fight that at some point everything's just going to start coming crashing down on Wonderboy. But the thing is with Wonderboy, like, is that elite level of a striker, like with his karate style, he's always relied on speed and movement. And speed and movement are the first things usually to go when a fighter's getting up there in age with that father time. It's the power that seems to be the last thing to go. So at some point, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, his entire game is just going to drop off a cliff because his entire game relies on speed and movement. And that's what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting for that speed and movement to decline with Thompson. He slows down, he's not moving as well, and suddenly he's nowhere near the same level of fighter that he used to be. But again, until we really see it, you know, it's hard to really say it's going to be this fight where it happens. And like I say, from a striking perspective, Buckley is fighting a fighter here that I guarantee is nobody's been able to replicate it to how Wonderboy actually fights in the cage during Buckley's fight camp. Buckley's never going to have experienced a striker the level and with the style that Thompson's got. Thompson, even at this stage in his career, has been beating fighters better than Joaquin Buckley. So Buckley's gonna have, and I've said this, you go back to every single Wonderboy fight I've ever broken down, I always say it's a puzzle that's hard to solve, and not many fighters solve this puzzle unless you're at the elite level. Now, Buckley's good. He's in his prime. He's aggressive. He comes forwards. He's got power. So I do think Buckley, if he can just get past that, that slick in and out karate movement of Thompson, he's going to be able to land on him. If this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think if Buckley doesn't land something to hurt Thompson and knock him out, I think Thompson's got the potential to just win a decision quite comfortably. But the other thing is, not only do I see the finishing upside with Buckley because of the power, even if he doesn't win a 15-minute kickboxing fight over 15 minutes, Buckley could still win by striking, by landing on Thompson. The thing is, Buckley has shown the ability to wrestle in previous fights, and we know that Wonderboy Thompson, once upon a time earlier in his career, in his prime, he was hard to take down, hard to wrestle. But as he's got older, he's been able to be got at a little bit more from that wrestling and grappling perspective, and Buckley has got the wrestling and grappling chops to at least be somewhat successful should he choose to do it. It's just having that trust that Buckley's going to go in there and try to wrestle Wonderboy. Is he going to land a couple of shots on Wonderboy, hurt him, and think, right, I can get him striking, and then slowly fall into the trap of Wonderboy's striking patterns? That's a possibility. And it's also a reason why I'm having a difficult time to be confident on either side here, because like I say, on one side of the coin you've got a 40-plus-year-old in Stephen Wonderboy Thompson that's got a real problem with wrestling at this age, and like I say, the striking and his speed and movement is likely to start declining at some point. And then on the other side you've got a young, hungry, athletic beast in Joaquin Buckley that's got serious power in his hands that will fall short on a technical striking fight, but Buckley's aggressive enough to come forwards and land, and I think that's what's leaning me towards Buckley a little bit more, because he's not going to be a fighter that's going to allow himself to get stuck on the outside. Even if it means him eating a couple of hard shots, Buckley's the kind of fighter that doesn't really give a fuck. He'll still come forwards, he'll still look to land on his opponents. And if it means him eating a couple of shots, then fine. But then he's got that wrestling aspect as well, which he's got to mix in. There's no way you can watch how Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is losing fights within the last couple of years and not think to yourself, actually, I'm going to try and take him down. So, yeah, look, I'm going to side with Joaquin Buckley. I think that the more I'm actually breaking this down and discussing the avenues to victory and how he's going to be able to combat the striking, and then like I say, you've got to trust that a fighter at this level in the UFC is going to see the holes in the wrestling and exploit it. You've got to, because if you don't have that trust at this level in the UFC, then who are you going to trust apart from an actual specialist? So yeah, look, I'm going to side with Joaquin Buckley. I think he can knock Thompson out. I think he can wrestle him. The way that Buckley loses is if he sticks on the outside and just allows himself to get pieced up, which the more I actually think about that, the less likely I think that Buckley as an elite level UFC fighter is going to allow himself to get pieced up like that without giving himself any sort of opportunity to win in the fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Joaquin Buckley to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got another really interesting fight that I went into tape leaning one way and came out of tape the other. We've got Marina Rodriguez versus Yasmin Lucindo. And look, from a striking perspective, this is a really interesting fight because Rodriguez is going to have height, reach, length over Yasmin Lucindo. Marina Rodriguez has also got some decent power as well, but I do think Lucindo is going to be the more aggressive, forward-facing fighter, pressurizing Rodriguez to get into the range, and I think she's going to have more power in the hands than what Rodriguez has. Now, Rodriguez mixes things up a little bit more on the feet as well with the striking. She'll use more kicks, whereas Lucindo, she will use kicks, but she tends to be more heavier on the boxing side, which, to be fair, is actually better for Lucindo in this type of fight, because if Lucindo had a variety of kicks and a good kicking game as well, I think that Rodriguez would piece her up, because Rodriguez is going to be the better kicker. But the thing is with Lucindo, she has to be closing that distance to land on Rodriguez or to do anything. Whether Lucindo wants to try and take Rodriguez down, whether she wants to try and be competitive striking, she's got to close the distance, get through the kicks, and start getting into boxing range. And that's where Lucindo's good. She's got power in her hands, good combinations, and that's, like I say, from a stylistic perspective, that all kind of works for Lucindo. Now, where Lucindo's going to fall into some sort of trap here if she's not careful is whether she goes through the boxing range into the clinch in the wrong way. Because again, I think this is another path to victory of Lucindo, but she's got to be careful because Rodriguez has got good knees, she's got good elbows, and Muay Thai is really good. So I think at kicking range, Rodriguez is going to have the better of Lucindo. But I don't think Lucindo's going to allow that to happen for too long. I think Lucindo will come forwards aggressively into boxing range. That's where Lucindo's going to land some really good shots on Rodriguez, potentially hurt her as well. But if Lucindo comes through that boxing range even further, then if she's striking at clinch range, then yeah, Rodriguez is going to be better there. However, and this is the big issue for me in this fight, Rodriguez has got such an issue with the wrestling, defensive wrestling and defensive grappling, to the point where she is going to struggle against any fighter that's got some sort of striking about them, that likes to get takedowns and get on top of their opponents as well as striking as well. So that kind of describes Lucindo. Lucindo's got a good striking game. She's got power. She's a good technical striker, but she's also a fighter that likes to mix things up as well and get takedowns. And the thing is, Lucindo's not shooting at the hips, lifting her opponents up, double legging them against the cage. I think that would be quite difficult to do against Rodriguez. What Lucindo does is she clinches with body locks and looks to reap legs out and trip her opponents down to the mat. That's the way to get a taller fighter down if you're going to do it. And then once she's on the mat, look, she's decent topside. She's got a good grappling game around her. And then you look at Rodriguez gets stuck all the time on bottom. I think the defensive grappling is much worse than a defensive wrestling, but when Rodriguez can get taken down, it's such a flaw and a hole in a game. And it's not as if Rodriguez is like a young 23, 24, 25-year-old fighter that's going to be able to pick up this defensive wrestling and grappling game as she enters her prime. Like, Rodriguez, believe it or not, is 37 years old. So she's very old for the weight division. And she's not going to be making the improvements in these areas that she needs to. Like, this is probably a finished product of Rodriguez. And I don't mean finished as in she's done and can't compete anymore. I mean finished as in, like, how we see Rodriguez now is likely how we see her for the rest of her career, until obviously the decline does kick in. I don't think she's going to be making rapid improvements. I think the defensive wrestling and the defensive grappling at this point in Rodriguez's career, it is what it is right now. And I think that's a big problem, because then you've got Lucindo on the other hand, who's 23, 24 years old, super young, making those developments. But even without the wrestling and grappling developments of Lucindo, I still think she's light years ahead of Rodriguez's defensive wrestling and grappling, and that's a big factor in this fight. Because look, Rodriguez has still got dangerous striking. She's a sniper down the middle. Like, she'll be competitive striking here 100%. Like, Lucindo won't just walk through her and just start blasting her and get the better of her striking. But I do think Lucindo's going to have enough volume and enough aggression to be able to be super competitive with the striking, to the point where she's very close to Rodriguez and will be able to get a body lock and try to trip and take her down and get on top of her. And just like I've just mentioned with Joaquin Buckley and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, there's absolutely no way, in my opinion, a fighter at this level in the UFC like Yasmin Lucindo, there's no way that Lucindo and her coaches and her team have not watched tape on Rodriguez and known that this is like a massive hole and flaw in a game, to the point where that's got to be the game plan. Get a strike, get in close, get a body lock, trip her down to the mat, and have success at least 2 out of the 3 rounds. So, look, it's one of these fights that I do think's like, look, Rodriguez has got the better experience, she's got good UFC experience, she's fought the better level of competition, but again, just because she's fought the better level of competition doesn't mean Lucindo's got a very clear path to victory. And that's where I'm having a difficulty with Rodriguez. I wouldn't be shocked with a Rodriguez win because I do know that she's a super slick striker and she's performed at a higher level against opponents at a higher level than Lucindo's at right now. For example, like Jessica Andrade. I think Lucindo and Andrade, by the way, would be a sick fight. But I think fighting somebody like Andrade last time out is probably, a very difficult fight because of the experience that Andrade has got. But Lucindo's going to have no fear in this fight. She's going to come forward. And like I say, regardless of the experience and the high-level competition of Rodriguez, she's still got that massive gaping hole in a game that I do think that Lucindo's going to be able to exploit and should exploit. And I've seen Lucindo on top of opponents that have got a better get-up game than Rodriguez and still do quite well. So, yeah, for those reasons, I'm picking Yasmin Lucindo to win this fight. And in the next fight, this could be a crazy fight. We've got Potieria versus Cesar Almeida. And look, there's a reason Potieria is fighting these really good fighters that the UFC like to put him on pay-per-views as well. And the dude's just exciting. Like, he's got a skillful skill set about him in regards to mixed martial arts. He's hung around in the UFC for at least this long. So regardless of what your thoughts and opinions of him are, me personally, I don't think his ceiling's super high in the UFC. But I don't think he's a fighter the UFC are going to even consider getting to, looking to cut him or anything like that. Like, Potieria is a super exciting fighter that brings the fight into every single fight, and the UFC love that type of fighter. Now, against Cesar Almeida, I think Potieria is running into a little bit of a problem here. Not like Cesar Almeida's like some high-level UFC fighter in the top 5, 10, 15 or whatever, but Cesar Almeida's got a dangerous striking game. He's, kickboxing background. He's fought Alex Pereira multiple times, for example. So Almeida has got real good kickboxing chops about him. And I think Potieria is the type of fighter that's going to be coming forwards, looking to be aggressive, maybe overexerts himself, or maybe just doesn't respect the technical qualities of Almeida. And look, Almeida might have to just deal with a guy coming at him at 100 miles an hour for maybe 60 seconds. But within those crazy exchanges, the big hooks landing from Potieria, I think Almeida's going to be able to find holes. When you're that high level of a kickboxer, you see things a little bit differently. And the slight openings that somebody maybe a lesser kickboxer probably wouldn't be able to see as clearly, somebody like Almeida will absolutely be able to see clearly. Whether that's throwing an uppercut on one of the big hooks that Potieria is landing, cover up, allow Potieria to throw these wide hooks and just leaving, small gaps through the middle where an uppercut can come in, and then maybe it's an uppercut and then left hook round the side after one of the hooks has missed. Like, Almeida, I think, will be able to spot holes here. Now, when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, Almeida can get taken down, he can be kept down as well, but also Almeida's takedown defense and his get-up game is getting better each fight as well, and it's something that was only naturally going to happen because Almeida's come from this striking background. So can Potieria explore any wrestling and grappling? Well, I don't think that's really his game, but even if he does decide to, I don't know if he's going to be able to be that successful against Almeida with the takedowns. You can never say never in regards to does he actually take him down, but I just don't think it's going to be Potieria's game plan. I think he's going to come out, he's going to try and strike with Almeida. That's where he loves to fight, and I think Almeida's going to catch him at some point. So, yeah, look, I think from a wrestling and grappling perspective, more likely to be on Potieria's side, but again, with the improvements that Almeida's making and within the right gym, within the right training partners, I just think Potieria is going to struggle if he decides to wrestle and grapple, just because that's not where he's predominantly best, which then leaves us to striking. And for me, I think Cesar Almeida, from a technical perspective, is light years ahead of Potieria, and Almeida carries power himself as well, which I think is going to be a deadly combination. For those reasons, I'm picking Cesar Almeida to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Alexander Hernandez versus Austin Hubbard, and it's an interesting fight in regards to how it plays out, because I kind of think that both fighters can be underwhelming at times. Like, just when you think that Austin Hubbard's maybe turned a little bit of a corner and he's going on a little bit of a streak, he takes a loss and just reminds us that, look, and I don't mean this disrespectfully at all, but he's just not a fighter that's going to be anywhere close to the rankings, in my opinion. I think at this level, sort of like in the middle of the division, is where Austin Hubbard will trade wins and losses. And, he'll keep himself in the UFC because he will win these fights. And also from Hubbard's perspective, defensively is one of the best fighters that I think you could have in and around where he is in the division as well. Like, he's seen so many high-level wrestlers, for example, like try to take him down, and he's just so resilient. He's got such good defensive game, and even if he does get taken down, he can get back up to his feet as well. So, and even from a striking perspective, it's hard to really look great against Hubbard, and I think that is what I'm trying to say. Like, defensively, he's so good that he's hard to look good against, but it's his offense, like, it's almost like he's difficult to beat, but then doesn't really push super hard to win either. And this is what's going to be interesting with Alexander Hernandez, because I don't think Hernandez is going to have a great amount of success offensively in regards to, I don't think he's going to go in there and whitewash Austin Hubbard anyway, or anywhere, should I say, in regards to the striking, wrestling, grappling. But I do think Alexander Hernandez is a better fighter because he fights to win. And again, I'm not saying Austin Hubbard doesn't want to win. I'm just saying, look, Austin Hubbard spends a lot of his time, in a defensive, from a defensive standpoint in his fights, where I think that Hernandez is going to be forcing the pace. I think he's going to be putting the pressure on Hubbard. I think he's probably going to be landing more volume as well. I think he'll be shooting the takedowns. I think if he mixes the striking and blends the striking into the wrestling, he'll be able to get a couple of those takedowns. Does he keep Hubbard down? Maybe. I find it hard to see him keeping Hubbard down for, long periods of time. But the bottom line is, the way I'm seeing this fight going is Hernandez is going to be the one moving forward. Hernandez is going to be the one landing the harder shots, the more volume as well, and then mixing that striking into the wrestling. So from the judges' eyes, if there is no finish, which I do think it's more likely to go to a decision, if I'm being honest, if there is no finish and it goes into the judges' scorecards, the judges are going to see forward pressure, they're going to see volume, they're going to see some hard shots, combinations, and they're going to see a bit of wrestling sprinkled in as well. And I think that's going to be a difficult one to score to Austin Hubbard. So for those reasons, I'm picking Alexander Hernandez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Carla Esparza versus Tecia Pennington. And I actually never mentioned this with the co-main event with Raquel Pennington, obviously Ticia's wife, and Juliana Pena, because I was very surprised looking at the records that Pennington and Pena, for how long each of the ladies have been in the UFC, have never actually fought before. And it's the same thing with Esparza and Tecia Pennington now. Now, if you look at the records, you will notice an exhibition bout. They fought in the Ultimate Fighter 10 years ago. That went to a majority decision win for Carla Esparza, who I believe went on to win that Ultimate Fighter season as well, but like that was a completely different Esparza, and like I say, it was listed as an exhibition bout. But it's really surprising that they never met in the UFC after that, because they've both been in and around the top of the division for a very long time. But of course, we've got this fight now, and again, we've got this fight maybe a little bit too later than what would have been good, because I think if you go back 5 or 6 years ago, I think this fight's like ridiculously competitive, like a pick'em type of fight. I think Esparza potentially would be the favourite in that fight as well. But now I am leaning towards Tecia Pennington for this fight. It's a different type of fight. I think that, look, Esparza has slowed down. I think she's still got good qualities about her. I think she'll still win fights in the UFC. But I just think that she's going to win fights outside of the level of the likes of a Tecia Pennington, for example. But stylistically, I think that Pennington poses a lot of issues for Esparza's wrestling, because for me, that's where Esparza wins the fight. If this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think it's Tecia Pennington all day long, and I don't think it'd be relatively close on a judge's scorecard, for example. But with Carla Esparza mixing in the wrestling, we've got to factor that in. But Tecia Pennington's got decent takedown defense. I also think she's got a decent get-up game as well. She's got decent enough jiu-jitsu to be able to make this fight not won and lost within the wrestling and grappling. So I think that the other element of the wrestling and grappling is which fighter is going to be the one moving forwards, or which fighter's going to be the one, engaging more. And I think that Pennington's got a good chance of being able to force Esparza backwards more often than not. And in that case, the wrestling's going to be harder for Esparza on the back foot. But also, even if it is out in the open space, I think that Tisha Pennington is going to be the quicker fighter with the movement. I think she'll be in and out of range nicely. And I think she'll just be hard for Esparza to really get some good entries in on shooting the takedowns at Pennington. You know, the good entries that, you know, allow the wrestler to be able to complete the takedown. So I just think Esparza is going to have a difficult time wrestling, but even if she does get a couple of takedowns, I think she's going to have a difficult time keeping Pennington down. Pennington should be able to spring right back up to her feet like she usually does, and therefore we're left with the striking, which I think is absolutely Tisha Pennington all over in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Tisha Pennington to win this fight. And in the next fight, this fight is supposed to have happened a couple of weeks ago, maybe a few weeks ago. I can't remember the exact date now, but we've got OSP Ovince St. Preux versus Ryan Spann. And I have broken this fight down before as well. Like I say, I just can't remember which card it was, but it can't have been too long ago because it's definitely like a recently rebooked fight. So, look, how I broke it down before is Ovince St. Preux is just a bit of, you know, an anomaly. Like, I don't even know if the anomaly is the right description, but he's just so difficult to, like, get a read on because he's winning fights where we're expecting him to lose, and then he's losing fights where we're thinking, actually, OSP has been on a decent run now. He's put a couple of good wins together. He should be beating this fighter, and then he goes and loses, and you're like, oh, well, what happened when he was fighting the fighters that he was expected to be knocked out against, for example? So he's just so, I mean, for me personally, he's always been one of these fighters that I've struggled to really get a good read on anyway in regards to making a strong prediction. So, look, that has to be said. I'm not going to try and hide away from that fact. There are a few fighters that I've always had some sort of difficulty getting solid reads on. Ovince St. Preux is just an awkward fighter, but he's so experienced at the same time. And, you know, for as good as his, you know, grappling game is with the Von Flue choke, his striking power is okay, but then he's hittable and he's been knocked out a load of times and he's been in wars and he's been taken down himself. So honestly, Ovince St. Preux is just, yeah, for me is very, very hard to get a read on and be confident on whether that's me picking him to win or me picking him to lose. So against Ryan Spann, the difficulty here is Ryan Spann can look like super dangerous as well. He's also got a tricky grappling game. He's also got power in his hands. He's also very inconsistent at times where, you know, again, like I said with OSP, Spann, you expect him to win certain fights and then he'll lose and then you'll think, okay, well, maybe Spann maybe isn't quite at the level that I thought he was, but then he'll go out there and he'll starch a really solid fighter that's on the way up, or a fighter you think that should be beating Spann. So again, there's inconsistencies on both sides. There's awkwardness on both sides. Both fighters have got a tricky grappling game. Ryan Spann with chokes, Ovince St. Preux with the Von Flue choke, and then both fighters have still got that knockout power. The reason I'm leaning towards Spann in this fight, though, is because I think the speed, the movement, and the athleticism is there on Spann's side, where it's not quite there on OSP anymore. And I do think there's got to be something to be said for the speed, movement, and athleticism. So although I'm absolutely not going to be shocked if OSP manages to grab another win here, you know, towards the higher end of the division, I do think Spann, like I say, I think the physicality of Spann is what's going to get him through this fight. That speed, that movement, the athleticism, and probably should be able to land maybe more frequently on OSP. And with that power as well, I think he could potentially knock OSP out, or at least drop him and then maybe choke him. So for those reasons, I am going to be picking Ryan Spann to win this fight. And the last fight to break down on this card, we've got Tim Means versus Court McGee. And again, these are the types of fights that I really like to see, especially when it comes to Court McGee, he's definitely over the hill, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. He's had a long, illustrious career. He's overcome a lot of personal difficulties and challenges as well, to the point where if you don't have respect for Court McGee, then just don't watch this sport, because he's a guy that, you know, has pulled through, changed his life around, and he's even got his own gym, I believe, coaching, and he has been doing that for a while. So he's definitely doing the right things for mixed martial arts, and he's been a real good competitor over a long period of time, but he's definitely in that decline stage of his career. Sure, he wasn't knocked out last time out. I thought he was going to be, and he was actually quite competitive with Morono, but he's been the 2 times before that he was knocked out badly. So yeah, I think that maybe he got away with not getting knocked out last time out, but there's still that durability issue for Court McGee. Of course, he's slowed down. He's not as mobile. He doesn't move as well as he used to. And for someone like Tim Means, look, Tim Means isn't a spring chicken either. Like, he's an OG of this game. He's up there with Court McGee in regards to how long he's been around, and a veteran in the UFC himself. So this is why I like the fight, because it's not as if one of these guys is fighting a young hungry killer that's just going to starch him in round 1, and it does absolutely nothing for anybody. These are the good fights to make. But I think that Tim Means is still dangerous. He can still output 100 plus strikes, even at his veteran age. I still think that Means has got some power as well, power to be able to knock Court McGee out. Court McGee, for me, has got to try and wrestle Means, but the thing is, Means back in the day had like a ridiculous knockout record where he was just knocking everybody out. So every time he fought somebody, they were trying to wrestle him, and Means got to the point, at the start, Means was getting taken down easily, held down, but then just because everybody tried to take him down and tried to wrestle him, Means just gradually improved with that wrestling and grappling defense to the point where he actually got pretty difficult to take down. And although you can still get him down, and he can be on his back a little bit, his defensive wrestling and grappling is so much better than it used to be, and it actually makes him competitive within the wrestling and grappling as well. So that's key here, because I think Court McGee is his best chance to win is to try and close the distance, get a hold of Means, take him down, maybe keep him down, old man strength, lay heavy on top of him. I just don't think Means is going to be susceptible to that here. I think that Court McGee might try to do it, but I think when McGee tries to get into range, the knees and the elbows of Means are really dangerous, and I just don't think he's just going to be able to grind a decision away against Tim Means here. I think Tim Means is going to be landing some good strikes. I think he could potentially hurt Court McGee. I think he could knock him out as well. So yeah, I think the grinding game for Court McGee is the way to win. I'm just not sure he gets away with it in this specific fight. For those reasons, I'm picking Tim Means to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. So once again, thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you for listening. If you're on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, please feel free to jump over to YouTube. Drop a subscription on the YouTube channel as well. It really does help us out. And if you do have, any questions about specific fights, or if you want to tell me where we disagree, or where you're betting, where you think your money's best, then again, you can drop something in the replies onto the YouTube video as well. It is myself that gets back to the replies. I do try my best every single week to respond to people and have conversations. So jump on there, let's talk if that's what you want to do. And then very lastly, one final time, if you're wanting to jump into the action, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler. We've got Baze AI, our UFC prediction software, in every subscription. All the subscriptions are super affordable. $5 for one event, $10 a month, or $99 for the entire year. And like I say, we don't separate those packages. You got all the Baze AI UFC predictions within the professional handicapper betting advice as well. And that's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.